I like to jump off the cliff right away, like rip the Band-Aid off. So I'm going to throw the tough questions at you right away. I have a list here of the other 4 of the top first gross of America. I would like you guys to fill in your 4 others behind Ridge. Hello and welcome to the Wine Centric show, where we speak to the titans of the wine industry. And oh yeah, have we got some titans up with me today. So one of my all-time favorite wineries, and I never mince words, so I'm just going to say it, the number 1 most important winery in America, Ridge Vineyards. I have with me the head of winemaking and the COO, Mr. John Olney. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. And because this is a joint effort and goes to show you how special Ridge is, I also had to ask my longtime friend, who is now the Senior Vice President of Global Sales for Ridge Vineyards, Mr. Michael Torino. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Matt. It's always good to see you. Always good to spend some time together. Our relationship goes back almost 20 years, and it's been a fun ride.
It really has been. It's crazy, the relationship that I've had with you and Ridge in general. We're going to get there, but I like to jump off the cliff right away, like rip the Band-Aid off. So I'm going to throw the tough questions at you right away. It's like opening with a fastball. So I hope you guys are ready. I said it in my opener. And there was, you guys have claimed this before, so this is nothing like super controversial, but I would deem, if they did, a classification like they did for Bordeaux in 1855 of the first growths of America, like they did in Bordeaux, that Ridge would be number 1. So we're just going to agree on that. So I'll take the guesswork for you guys out of it. I have a list here of the other 4 of the top first gross of America. And I would like you guys to fill in your 4 others behind Ridge. You can choose if you want me to go first or which one of you wants to go first. Go ahead, John. You made the first laugh, so I'll call on you. I want you to name who you would say, compared to Bordeaux's first growths, would be the first 5 growths of the United States of America, with Ridge.
Okay.
We all agree being number 1.
I guess for me, I think I've always liked what Captain Corison does. I think, everything that's being done up at Spring Mountain has always been in that area, Keene as well. And probably Diamond Mountain. Those are the first ones that come to mind.
Okay, fair. And listen, this might be controversial. You might get some emails, some hate mail, but
I'm
all at the top of your mind. Michael, would you like to go, or you want me to go? Your choice.
I'm happy to go. I think Forreston would be right up there for me as well.
Okay.
Dominus has to make the list for me, no doubt.
Yeah.
I'd probably include Peter Michael in there. And then the Isley Vineyard, I think that goes in.
Okay, fair. I got you. Well, I had, if you guys wanted to know, so Ridge number 1, I had to put Height Cellars there as number 2, Stag's Leap Wine Cellars as number 3, as far as importance in America. And then it was kind of hard for these to organize the next 3, but I had Opus and Dominus as well. And then I'm cheating here because I had to add like an honorable mention, because nobody would ever put this or think about this, but you really can't talk about American winemaking without Constantine Frank up in the Finger Lakes of New York. They really kind of set the mold, at least on the East Coast, and really helped it. So there we go. All right, we got that out of the way. You guys feeling all right? You feeling like you still want to go forward?
Okay.
Ridge, you guys, like I said, Montebello started way back by Osea Perón, was founded in the mid-19th century. And then the 3 engineers, led by David Banyan, kind of made wine from there in 59. In 62, they incorporated or commercialized and made a winery. And the story goes on from there as Paul Draper made the wine since 1969 up until you took over, John, in 2021. I mean, you were still making wine there. Well, 2016, I guess, is when Paul stepped aside. My question there in saying all that is Ridge Montebello specifically at this point is a known entity. You guys are famous for being non-interventionalists, for really honoring the land. But how much does that get confusing when you have this iconic wine that people know what it tastes like, they have an idea of it, and then every vintage, it's kind of got to taste like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think I know what you mean. And, obviously there's, when you make a wine for as long as we have, and it kind of has a spotlight on it, like say, there's sort of an expectation of a certain style, and I think in that regard, one of the great things, and I give, we give Paul a lot of credit for this, is that, the wine, in the wine business, there's tastes, there's fads that come and go. I mean, I can remember, going all the way back into the late 80s, early 90s, we talk about Zinfandel, late harvest was like, it was a really big thing. And then we had the super ripe Zinfandels. And really, if you look at, I'm getting off base a little bit in terms of Montebello, but same idea. If you look at guys,
sure.
We've been making it in the same way. It's still meant to be elegant, balanced, and made to live, not super alcoholic. So I think just by sticking to that certain style of wine and not really chasing, and that sort of thing, I think that's helped us a lot. But then to your point, and especially with Montebello, we do have, being up here on the mountain in a climate that sees probably a little bit more, a little bit more variability than you do maybe down in the valley. And also the fact that in any given vintage, we're tasting all of the individual blocks blind, and then we're picking out the ones that we think are going to make the best one. So you can see a variation. For example, in 2023, it was a tough year for Merlot, and we only had about 8 or 9% of Merlot in the Montebello. This year in 24, we got 17%. So, you do see those kind of differences, but, I think we have been, and certainly it's not our aim to really change the style. So I think anything that we do change, if we're shifting between coopers and that sort of thing, I think they're fairly subtle changes. So there's nothing radical that, is going to really make a major shift.
So if I'm kind of summarizing what you're saying, it's like you have a guideline, you have a benchmark, and you are in some ways trying to hit that. And I guess like even getting down to the nitty gritty, and Michael, you please weigh in here, because I think it's important, the idea of sales and the reason, people might ask, oh, well, you have the winemaker, why do you need the sales guy? Well, I think that's such an important part of Ridge's story and how long you've been there, et cetera. So I don't need to validate why you're here, but I just did. So my wife asked me, well, why do you have the sales guys on? Well, it's an important part of the story. It's really important because you're also intimately involved in a lot of choices, I assume. I think so. So I guess, well, I should start there. Michael, do you get involved in the blending trials? Do you get invited up there?
No. So sales has always been disconnected from that portion of it. Production has always led Ridge, which I think is the right way to do it. And then, we take it that step further. We take it to the market. We kind of explain the differences from year to year on variation and the nuances. And, as John was kind of talking about, the assemblage process, a core thing that Ridge has always done, and this was another thing that Paul brought in, at the end of the assemblage process, the team tastes that vintage fly versus the prior 5 vintages. So even though there's, variation, or like John said, we may use some different coopers each year, there's nuances, the line connects across those 5 vintages into that 6th vintage every year at the assemblage.
Yeah.
And that really keeps it on track, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's kind of answers my question, because it's like, I'm thinking, if I'm tasting a wine blind, right, and I have no preconceived notion, I mean, obviously it's not completely blind. You know where the wine's coming from. You have an idea of the potential varietals. But in your head, and John, you can speak to this, you're thinking, I would assume you're thinking, is this a great wine right now? Or does it match my thought of what Montebello tastes like? And often, hopefully, maybe they're one and the same.
Yeah, and I also think that that's kind of one of the magics of when you're dealing with the vineyards like Montebello is that, it really is such a unique place to be growing the Bordeaux varietals that, it tends to just bring itself out. In other words, I mean, we probably could do enough winemaking things to disguise it, but since that's not our aim, I think Montebello kind of on its own almost always tastes like Montebello.
Yeah.
Sense.
No, that makes total sense. And I should clarify all this. And by the way, the conversation I think is probably the same for your other signature wines of being Lytton Springs and Geyserville, which are we'll get to as well. But I want to clarify for maybe if you're new to the game or you don't even know what Montebello is. Montebello is this unbelievable high elevation vineyard that makes some of the best Cabernet Sauvignon in the world, certainly in California. And to give you a reference point, it's kind of high atop above Apple, right? Where Apple is in Cupertino, right? You guys can almost look down on Apple campus.
We can look down. We do look down on it. It's a funny juxtaposition. We're up on this mountain, complete agricultural sort of environment, and we're looking down on the Silicon Valley.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
And you were founded by engineers, so there's some sort of synergy and harmony there. Okay, so Michael, you've been with Ridge since 2008, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
17 years, really worked your way up through the ranks. I have to imagine, like, was this a dream job for you going out? And be honest with us, like maybe it wasn't, and maybe it has become that.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. I was in the wine business prior, came through the restaurant side, was in the wine business through wholesale, and then I was working at Bonnie Doon Vineyard at the time.
That's right.
Yeah, so I was at Bonnie Doon, and Ridge kind of came calling as they needed somebody for the East Coast initially. And yeah, I mean, it was a dream job for me. I mean, Ridge was always a brand that I sold in wholesale, I sold in restaurants, so I admired and thought the world of. And when the opportunity came up, it was just perfect. It was the right fit.
And you talk about the stability of Ridge versus the, let's say, ever-changing nature of Randall Graham and his famed eponymous Bonnie Doon Vineyards, I can imagine.
That's right. I mean, while I was there for about 5 years. It was like 3 different companies over those 5 years. It was, through the sale of Bakehouse, through Pacific Rim splitting off on its own, and all that stuff.
That's crazy. Yeah, what a life. Okay, back to Ridge. And, you guys are one of the most transparent wineries there is out there. Everything that goes into your wine goes on your label. All your vineyards are certified organic as of 2022, all your estate vineyards. And I think one thing that, maybe gets lost is that you guys are owned by a corporation. And I think that's okay, because it is what I come to know as your guys' story. It's an amazing fusion, right? And that's, I think, tells the narrative of why we have the winemaker and the salesperson here, because you have taken the resources that a corporation given you, maintained the intentionality and the through point of a winemaker like Paul Draper and his predecessors. And today you've just taken the best of grapefruit into the best of a corporate business structure, letting the passion shine through. I laid it out for you. How would you guys talk and speak to the success of what Ridge has become? John?
Sure. The story, sort of the evolution of Ridge. I mean, it was, if you go back to the 60s and you read some of the old kind of anecdotes about Ridge, I mean, it was a shoestring operation. And, when Paul came on, what he realized, and I think the big part of this vision of Paul that really keeps us going these days is that he understood that, if you're going to make great wine over a long time from great vineyards, at some point you need to own this vineyard. You know, how else are you going to control the farming? You know, and in any given year, if you're buying from a farmer, they can just say I'm selling to someone else. You know, it became pretty obvious that, you know, we just needed some more financial backing in order to be able to do that. And, you know, Paul was approached by any number of corporations that he passed on. And, you know, when we finally, you know, he finally formed the partnership with Super Pharmaceutical, he was really forming that, you know, with the owner who was a Ridge, you know, a Ridge collector. And I recently had the opportunity to actually go to Japan and visit their headquarters, and I was really taken just by the commitment to quality there. So I think it's actually it's just been a great partnership really for us.
Let the people who know wine run the winery.
Yeah. I mean, they're you know, they want us to make the best wines possible, and that's what, you know, Ridge has always wanted to do. So
That's great.
mutual
Michael,
goal.
do you have the same sentiment, or do you add anything to it?
No, I definitely do. You know, they're incredibly supportive. They're very hands off in terms of the day-to-day management and how we operate. And as John said, they really support the mission that we're on to make the best wines possible. But they're there when we need them, when we've had the opportunities to purchase some of these vineyards. They've been able to support us and help us through those processes. And, you know, a big part of the marriage that works is they're not, you know, investing in any other winery. They don't own other wineries. They're not doing this to try and build this kind of wine conglomerate that you see these other companies get into trouble with when they go down that road. That's not
Right.
the vision or the mission that they've ever had.
Right. Yeah. And I think it speaks to who you guys are today. Let's talk about the wines. You know, right now behind me, I don't know if you can see, but I have the Three Valleys. I have the Paso Robles Inn, the East Bench, and then I have two great vintages of the Estate Cab. My son's vintages, the 2016 and the 2019. And I had some Montebello, but I didn't bring it out because I didn't want to stand it up before I wanted to drink it. But I just wanted to show you that, you know, I actually, like, many people think that I'm a collector, but I'm actually not that big of a collector because I've been luckily gifted a lot of wines from back in the day of coming up in the industry. But for those wines, I specifically, before I represented them in this area, went and sought them to start my son's collection because I want them to have a collection of their birth years. So there we go. Michael, I wanted to ask you, as far as the pushback we talked about before we get into the wines, we talked about, you know, that idea, and there are some sommeliers or wine professionals who might like poo-poo that idea, like, oh, it's, you know, you're owned by a corporation. Shame on you. Do you get that in the market? And if not, what are some of like the negative things you get in the market, or like the barriers for Ridge wines?
Yeah, you know, we don't get that. It's really amazing. It's rare that people even know that we're owned by a corporation.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people still think Paul owns Ridge, you know, outright. More often than not, when they do find out we're owned by a corporation, they're surprised. And then they're almost more surprised by how we haven't changed and how we're not driven by corporate, and kind of respect that relationship. So that's kind of a bigger surprise that we see there. And then in terms of pushback from the market, you know, we don't get much pushback in general. You know, Zinfandel's kind of had its day where it's been, you know, taken to the mat multiple times. So oftentimes we hear comments about Zin in general, that it's kind of a tough category, maybe doesn't sell. But, you know, when it comes to wines like Geyserville and Lit Springs, we come back to the wine and the vineyard, and it's really not, you know, it's a Zinfandel-based wine, but they're much more complex than that. There's a lot more going on between vineyard, the blend that goes in it, the, you know, varietals beyond Zinfandel. So more often than not, when something like that comes up, I just, you know, let's taste it. Let's forget all that and taste it.
That really is an amazing thing that you guys have not only built that on, you know, Cabernet, but Zinfandel-based blends, which most people think, and the signature of your winery is balance and agility of your wines. And yet Zinfandel is thought of as this like really rich, overripe grape. But I think, it speaks to who you guys are. And also, John, I know you know this, but the field blends that you have out there, right, is what really balances out that Zinfandel. Can you speak to those?
To Mike's point, I mean, I see it out in the market, and I get a lot of people saying, how do you guys sell Zinfandel? I mean, my gosh, we can't sell it. One of the things I say is we don't really sell Zinfandel. We sell Geyserville, we sell Whitney Springs, and so I think just the fact that I think Ridge kind of got a head start in the Zinfandel world, having started making single vineyards in Geyserville in 1966, Paso Robles in 1967. So Paul and the team really had the opportunity to just really hand select some of the very, very best vineyards. So that's what we get to work with. And probably most of those are field blends, which, I think is a critical part of what makes a great Zinfandel vineyard. It's pretty uncanny just the way those various grape varietals complement each other. You've got all that real ripe raspberry fruit from the Zinfandel, and yet the Carignan brings that zingy fruit that you really need, due to the ripeness of the Zin. And then you have the Petit Syrah in the background, which is giving you that color, that tannin. And Petit Syrah it's an interesting grape. I think it's such an amazing blending grape because it's not like Syrah, which kind of wants to take over, it's much more of a dominant grape varietal. So it comes in, it gives the color, it gives the tannin, and yet it doesn't really try to, change the overall flavor profile of the wine.
I never really defined that. What the difference is, between Petit Syrah and Syrah. I mean, we know Shiraz and Syrah and their history of it from, I think, ancient Persia, but what's the origins of Petit Syrah, and were they ever linked?
Yeah, so Petit Syrah is actually a cross between Syrah and what's called Pelersan, which is a basically forgotten grape from the south of France. And then Syrah is actually its own, original grape, if you will.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and you guys we're making 100% Petit Syrah. Are we still making that wine?
Yeah, we still do make 100% Petit Syrah from Lytton Springs. And, of course, we used to make the York Fruit.
Yeah, and by the way, John, we didn't really honor your background, but the resume is pretty impressive, I want to say. I'm going to get there in a moment, but before, I'm just going to take a little break because you guys look a little tired, and I wanted to send some coffee your way. So this is a cool thing I did with a local roastery. We made the Tastemaker series. I feel like you guys would be very akin or synergistic with this coffee. It's a single origin blend of coffee, and it's made with this Pacamara, which is kind of like a varietal. And they do this really interesting roasting process where it's still in the cherry, which is the natural process, which is very difficult. Anyway, this is the Carborough Coffee Roasters. It's really amazing roastery out there near me in Carborough, North Carolina. And I'm going to send you guys some of this. So hopefully you'll enjoy your coffee and wake up a little bit.
Looking forward to it.
You're
right.
speaking our language. I think, I'm a nerd about coffee. John
Are you?
went up to me all day long. He's got a Ferrari coffee maker involved like he is.
Yeah, no, we'll put it to use.
What's your coffee maker, John?
It's Marzocco.
Marzocco. Okay, I don't even know what that is.
It's basically the coffee machine. Every time you go into, a high-end coffee shop, it's that one with the nice little curve and everything on it.
Okay, gotcha. We'll have to show it in the show notes. So, John, you're making California fruit, obviously from old vines, but your training goes back to some of the top names in France. You worked with Aubert de Villaine. It doesn't get any bigger than that. Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, although I think you worked at his Bouzeron spot. That still qualifies. You worked with Chauve, which is one of the best Northern Rhone producers, if not the best. And then you worked with Tempier, which is the top Bandol producer. How does that influence? How did that set you up to work with California fruit?
Well, I think if you, if you take it back maybe one step, and talking a little bit about what we started with, my first job, I met Kermit Lynch when I was in France, down in Provence, and that was where that was the first job. He offered me a job, and that's how I first came to California. So I started working in the import business. So my first experience in wine was through sales. Which, these days, I think, I realize how valuable that actually was, just to have that experience on the front end. But of course, Kermit, being, specializing in, just French wines, that, really gave me a focused insight on those types of wines. And my uncle was a food and wine writer, as well, and he lived in Provence. And, just by tasting wines out of his cellar, I just had this amazing exposure to really many of the great wines of the world. So that was sort of the background that had been laid. But then, in terms of, I think what we talk about in terms of, at Ridge, sort of traditional winemaking, and which, in simple words, I think is based on, just like in cooking, if you get the right ingredients, then then traditional, more hands-off winemaking works, because you don't have to do as much to the fruit. You don't have to manipulate it, because it's kind of, it's all right there. And, so that's really what I learned, but got to learn in sort of different contexts. Right? So you're starting with sort of a mix based on Mourvedre, then you're moving up to pure Syrah, and then first Pinot being a whole different animal. So it was an amazing experience. And then, and when I was done with that and I came back to the States, kind of looking around, and I'd met Paul before, Ridge was just kind of the natural choice, in terms of, the approach that they were taking to winemaking, and it's a great place to work too. So
Sure.
it was kind of a natural.
I love Paul's explanation. I was watching a video of him where he said the reason that he took the natural winemaking approach, I mean, yes, that's what he believed in, but also it was the winemakers at UC Davis, and thinking about going to enology school meant that he had to learn a lot of science. And he's like, oh, I didn't like science and I wasn't good at science.
Yeah, right.
But I could look back at the natural winemaking process, how our ancestors did it, and do that. That's a classic Paul story. When you guys say this non-intervention winemaking, so is it all natural yeasts in every bottling?
Yeah. So it's all natural yeast.
Do you cultivate a yeast and then pitch it, or you just let it run naturally?
We just let it run naturally. Obviously, if we have, once harvest gets started, if we have a fermentation that comes in and it's sluggish getting started, we can take some, we can pitch it from another tank. We don't add malolactic bacteria. So malolactic just basically happens on its own, which in some cases, especially with Chardonnay, is a good thing, because that leaves some CO2 in the wine while it's going through malolactic in barrel. We really haven't seen the need, you might say, to use things like enzymes to extract color. We get all the color we need, from our grapes. Just the basics of SO2, tartaric acid when it's needed, usually in Zinfandel. With Montebello, we're fortunate to have such great acidity here up at the mountain that we actually have to de-acidify it sometimes.
That's amazing. Is that a common practice if you have too high acid, or would other people add sugar capitalize?
I think if it's just a question of really low pH and high acid, then de-acidifying, whether it's with potassium or calcium, is what you would do. Chaptalization is much more a question of if you don't have enough sugar.
I have to say, I think that is one of the microcosms and the keys to Ridge's success, because like all this thing where I'm thinking about, what am I going to ask these guys, and how am I going to, what's the narrative? And I'm thinking about, like, it's just amazing how, and I've used this word before, how iconic you've become. But when you think about that, you think about the non-interventionalist winemaking, you think about that versus what was popular in the Napa Valley, the fact that you're not Napa Valley with Santa Cruz and Sonoma, and, all the things that go into those, what was big in the 1990s, and I'll say the word, was Parkerized wines, big alcohol, big color, voluptuous fruit. And you guys are the antithesis of that, even through the popularity of those times. And I have to ask, I mean, Michael, you weren't around them, but like, you probably have heard the stories of the salespeople knocking on the doors and being like, guys, we got to put more alcohol in this wine. We got to use some Mega Purple. We got to do this. Like, do those conversations ever creep in?
Yeah, no, they certainly do. I mean, we get asked all the time how we didn't take those trends. And, as much as calved and perforization, it was also, times when vin producers were pushing 18% alcohol and, bragging about it. We never did that either. We stayed, balanced and steady and stayed the course. And now, you see producers are returning to that.
I also think about, and John, I wonder if this keeps you up at night, but like the natural fermentation route, non-pitching yeast, just leads to so many variables. Just to take this back and like give this some context, I always say the wineries that I like, the wines that I like to drink are about farming, meaning that you grow the best possible fruit, the best possible grapes you can, because wine is an agricultural product. You pick the grapes, you crush it into juice, and naturally, voila, it turns into wine, right? Like that's the ideal if we can do that. But it doesn't always happen that way. And there's so many variables, especially with California weather these days. Like, how do you remain calm when all of these variables are happening on a daily basis on your wines?
It's not the easiest route, to take. Because, really what it's all about is we're giving up a certain amount of control over the process. That's sometimes I call it like faith-based winemaking. You're just kind of believing in the process. So yeah, you are taking some chances in terms of, coming out of fermentation with higher VAs, possibility of Brettanomyces, creeping in. So there's a lot more to watch. That's why both of our wineries have pretty sophisticated labs. So, so that we're really able to monitor, regularly in real time, and intervene where we need to. So it's more difficult. Yeah. But, it's something we've been doing, I think, long enough that you kind of get into the rhythm, so to speak.
And you kind of have workarounds that are more natural rather than intervention, temperature changes.
Yeah. And we've also, Ridge, I think one of the things that Paul brought to Ridge was the whole notion of declassification. In other words, it's a foregone conclusion, whether it's Litany Springs, Dazzaville, or Montebello, that we don't expect to use every single vineyard parcel in the blend. There's always going to be some that, whatever, maybe the weather wasn't quite great over in that corner of the vineyard. Maybe the fermentation went a little sideways. It's not bad, but it's not, it's we don't want to put that in the geyser bill, and those are things that we then sort of blend, and that's where Three Valleys comes from.
Right. Yeah. So essentially it's like the Bordeaux model where you have a first wine, first growth, and then kind of whatever doesn't make it into that goes into your second bottling, which is not a bad thing. It's still, that second bottling is great wine, but it's just not up to the standards, the A+ standards of the top wines.
Still a great bottle, and, better price point, and it allows us to make our single vineyards that much.
Yeah. Which reminds me of something. You guys are coming out with a new project. I know you've talked about it, so I'm not like breaking news, but you're going back actually to the future in an old label, which you guys used to call the Santa Cruz Mountains. And you used to call the Chardonnay that as well, if memory serves, with a third tier Cabernet. So you have the Montebello, you have the estate Cabernet like I've got back there, and now you're going to be releasing a Santa Cruz. What was the thoughts behind that?
Mike, you want to start with it?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So Montebello and Estate Cab, first and foremost, are so successful and they're so small production. They sell out, are on allocation every year. And, Montebello is only so big. There's only so much fruit we can grow there and only so much, wine we can produce from that vineyard. So we've kind of internally talked about this for years. And finally, in 2023, the opportunity came up where we said, we can go out and source some fruit from neighbors on the mountain, from a few other vineyards in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and make an appellation-based wine and kind of resurrect that Santa Cruz Mountains label, but make it a true Appalachian wine. Because in the past, that was all of our own estate fruit. It was what the estate Cabernet has become today. We never sourced open for that. But in this scenario, we're able to source, create this incredible wine, helps us kind of put a flag on Santa Cruz Mountains, which we've always, kind of fought to do. And, comes into a lower price point than estate Cap and gives us 3, separate Cabernet price points to hit with 3 escalating qualities of wine and kind of a bigger story to tell. We just see the success of the estate Cap and how quick it sells out. So the ability to do something else in Cabernet made a lot of sense for us.
So essentially, to break that down, you always had Montebello, and then the Cabernet that didn't go into Montebello used to go into a Santa Cruz appellation, which was all estate. That bottling then became the estate Cabernet, and now you're sourcing other fruit in the Santa Cruz area to make this Cabernet, Santa Cruz Cabernet. Will the same thing happen with Chardonnay?
I think that's less likely. There's just less of it, and I think also in the Chardonnay arena, we've been planting some more Chardonnay, so I think that we're able to generate, more on our own. But there's a conversation there still, probably.
Okay, because I know in my day job, a lot of people are bothering me asking why they didn't get any Chardonnay this year because the 2023 just came out and Jeb Dunnick gave it 100, or Virginia from Jeb Dunnick gave it 100 points. So, and I know that you guys have planted more. There's, I think, another 4.5 acres or something coming online for the Chardonnay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, I, for one, am looking forward to that. And so, John, just explain that to me because, first of all, the malolactic fermentation, for those of you who are listening and don't know what malolactic fermentation is, it's essentially the creaminess that comes out of wine. All red wines, for the most part, go through it, and some white wines go through it. I like to, we talked about coffee earlier. My best analogy for that is if people like coffee and it starts out as black coffee, well, malolactic is like adding the creamer. So that's kind of what malolactic, but it's a secondary fermentation. And so that happens naturally as well with the Chardonnay. You guys don't do anything for that?
Correct. Yeah. So, so basically, it's the, natural conversion of malic acid, which is the acid of the apple, into lactic acid, which is more the acid of milk. So that's where you get that softening that you mentioned. And again, we're fortunate to have, enough natural acidity so that when our Chardonnays go through that malolactic fermentation and it drops the acid down, we still have enough, firm acidity to have a balanced wine. But yeah, it happens naturally. And, we're keeping the Chardonnay usually at a cooler temperature, which slows down the malolactic fermentation. So, our malolactics could happen anywhere, November after harvest through April or May.
And does it go through 100%? Like, did this one go through?
All of our wines always go through malolactic.
Go through 100%. Okay. The other thing that's unique about your winery is always, for the most part, steadfastly American oak. Real quick for those listening again, because I want to keep this approachable to everybody. So the difference is a lot of traditionally wineries would use French oak. Very general level, gives you much more of baking spices. Think vanilla, think butterscotch and caramel. Kind of for those of you who like bourbon, it always has to go in a charred oak barrel. Bourbon does. Versus American oak gives you more savory spices, dill, herbs, things like that. I know because, Michael, we're going to get into this, but I was at the first ever Ridge Symposium. Thank you very much. One of the best wine trips in my entire life. That you guys have done lots of trials. You have gone Slovenian oak, you've tried French oak, and it just always comes back to the American oak. Why do you guys think that is?
I think the origins of sort of our commitment to American oak, goes back to, if you have to go back to, say the late 1960s and 70s. And at that time, in California, we were just sort of discovering the idea of small cooperage, right? I mean, for years and years and years, most American or California wine had been, blended in big redwood uprights. So most of California was sort of leaning towards French oak, and at that time, you had Napa that was starting to, try to put Cabernet on the world map, and Paul sort of looked at all the possibilities out there, and he said, we're not really out here trying to make Montebello taste like a Bordeaux. We want it to just taste like Montebello. And we think we can get the quality. We think Montebello can handle the American oak. So let's just source it local, and let's just work with the coopers we have here. And that's kind of how it started. And when you start talking a little bit about, where we started in terms of the style of the wine, it really is, it really does become part of the whole flavor profile of that wine. It's one of the things that I think, it helps you recognize, Montebello for being what it is. We've been really happy with it. I mean, we always throw in a handful of French coopers that we taste blind, just to, in some ways, just kind of reconfirm where we are in American oak. But, if anything, I think the quality of the cooperage has just, gotten better and better in the United States. So that the differences, I think, that once were there, in terms of maybe American oak being criticized for being a bit more crude or harsh, I think was much more related to, just the cooperage that had not quite matured to the point where it needed to be for making wine barrels.
So the quality of the cooperage is there ever a time in your tasting trials behind the scenes? And by the way, how does it work? Like, so you have a winemaker at Montebello, you have a winemaker, Shauna, at Lytton Springs, and then they kind of both, I guess, report into you for flowchart speak. How many people are involved in the tasting trials and how that works between the two separate wineries?
So for Montebello, when we do the assemblage, Montebello is the most involved of the tastings that we do. So when we get together, we do assemblage tastings for Montebello. We're usually about a group of 8. So the vineyard team joins us, and then everyone in production. Paul usually sits in on those. So it's about, roughly 8 people.
Has there ever been a year where there was like serious contention about, guys, the French oak barrels are really, really showing well. I think we need to look at them?
I cannot remember that ever happening.
Okay. It's unanimous. Michael, the other thing about Ridge, and we've talked about it, is the affinity by how they've been embraced by the wine community, professionals and consumers alike. You guys have a long history of reaching out to sommeliers and wine professionals. How do you cultivate that and continue it going forward?
Yeah, well, you touched on it earlier. Things like the Somm Symposium, I mean, that's been one of our best ways to really get these deep relationships with somms and with the wine community. And really our team of sales managers, both Katie in the export world overseeing international and the team domestically here, they're constant out in the market, tasting with somms, engaging at events and making sure, we're front and center relevant with the somm community and the wine community.
I have to wonder, what does it, I'm asking for a friend. No, and actually you just hired somebody that I used to work with, but like, what are some of the things that you look for when you're hiring somebody to represent Ridge in the market? Like, what are some of the things that you could not live without?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a certain checklist. It's really down to the individual and who they are. And, Brian, you're speaking of, he was a perfect fit for us, right? He had experience across multiple states, really understands fine wine. I mean, I think that's probably one of the main criteria. They have to understand wine, be passionate about it. It's not just a sales job. It's really about loving, the industry that we're in and, the kind of lifestyle that it leads to. Achieve wine. It's, a whole part of it. And that ability to connect with people, make relationships, develop these deep relationships. And as soon as we hired him, he reached out to me, and I got probably texts from, 50 different people. Wow, great hire. Like that's a perfect fit.
Yeah, that's good validation.
Absolutely.
For sure. The Sommelier Symposium, I don't know of any other American wineries that do this. Maybe they do some, but essentially, I think it was 2011 was the first one. Is that right?
That's right.
So for now, what's that? 14 years, you guys have invited something like 10 sommeliers from around the country, 10 prominent or up and coming sommeliers from around the country, and take us, what happens in the Somm Symposium?
Yeah, exactly. So we do, we're up to 14 now. We bring a couple people from export as well this year, or every year now. So 2 people from the international world come. So we've had people as far as Tokyo come to this.
Oh, wow.
Several attendees from the UK, some Canada folks, your way. So great representation. The international distribution piece is so big to us, being in 60 countries. And it's always been an important thing. And Paul always said it, if you want to have an international reputation, you have to have international distribution. So it's been front and center for us for a long time. But at the Somm Symposium, we bring this group. They spend 3 days with us. We go spend a day at Montebello, spend time in the vineyards, the cellars, with the whole production and vineyard team. We do library tastings, dinners, Michelin star restaurants, and then we go to Lytton Springs and kind of do it all over again there between Geyserville and Lytton Springs. And it's a way for people really to kind of see everything. The curtains pulled back. They get full exposure to the entire team at Ridge. They can ask us any questions they want and really understand, the vineyards and just as importantly, people and what goes on behind the scenes at Ridge and Elite, and they become lifelong friends.
I'm an example of that. It's amazing. And if you're a wine professional out there, I don't know, how do you get on your radar to get invited to that?
Yeah. So the regional team, as they're out there every year, they kind of run their short list, and if they meet people and, they kind of keep notes and they're like, oh, this would be a good candidate. This would be a good candidate. And once we get into the new year, we always kind of go through that list and really talk through, and we try and spread it out between the regions, one person from New York, one Chicago, maybe a Texas, a Florida, and kind of really spread it out as we go. And it's really no secret sauce. It's not a sales program. It's really people that we think we can connect with and can become, lifelong ambassadors for Ridge.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll just say it. Hey guys, it's, for those of you listening, be like, shit, how do I get on that? I poured 3 Valleys by the Glass at a very prominent steakhouse in New York City. And I'm not saying that was the reason, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have depletions. So here's a little tips and tricks. The 3 Valleys comes in kegs. So that's 26 bottles every time you deplete a keg. That'll get on somebody's national radar for depletions. Okay. I just helped you out there, Michael. You're welcome.
Totally. I appreciate that, because I will say we've never invited somebody who's never carried our wines. So
yes,
there is that.
There you go. And you also answered my other question about the fact of your interest. I mean, like we said, you're the senior vice president of global sales, not sales. And I think we talked about this offline a couple of weeks ago, but I think Ridge is it the number one American exported wine? It's sales?
From a volume perspective, definitely not. There'd be some bold companies that go well beyond that.
Sure.
From a placement perspective, we work with a few different services that track data globally on wine lists. And, we're always for California wineries, we're either number 1 or number 2, depending on the country. And it's usually us and Opus who are kind of right there at the top 2 for the most restaurant placements globally.
Yeah. John Michael. Whoa, we just got John, Michael, and Matthew. I didn't even realize that biblical here.
Yeah, we're on the last supper.
Hopefully there's a bottle of Montebello. What is, okay, you don't have to tell me the best because that's cliche, but what are some of the oldest bottles of either Montebello, Geyserville, or Lytton Springs that you have tasted in the last couple of years? Or actually, no, ever. What's the oldest bottles you've tasted, Michael?
The oldest bottles, I've had a couple back into the 60s. I think 68 might have been the oldest Ridge that I've tasted. Or did we have a 64 at one point, John?
Yeah, we had the 64
when
when we did the anniversary tasting.
That's right. That's right. So 64, I think, would be the oldest for me.
Okay, cool. How was it?
It's, still alive. I mean, there was life left in it. I mean, you knew it was old. It certainly tasted like it, had been around for a long time, but still light, still acidity and a little freshness to it.
Okay, nice. John, before I get to you, I actually have a question because when I was looking in my collection today, I have 89 Montebello and 750, and I heard you talk about 89 on a Magnum recently that tasted really good, and I have an 02 half bottle. What's your memory of obviously you weren't around for 89, but I know you've tasted it. What can you tell me about what I should expect out of those wines?
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of different vintages. 89, was a little bit like 91. So not the biggest wine, but perfect balance. I mean, it's
Okay.
been elegant from the beginning. It's a beautiful bottle of wine and probably tasting outstanding right now. And I would say that 02 is a wine that really is just now at 20 years coming into its, I have had that a couple of years ago. We poured it at the New York Wine Experience, and it was a beautiful bottle. It's amazing how young it tastes, but it's going to be a great wine.
What's the oldest vintage you've tasted?
Same as Mike, 64.
64.
Yeah, I don't even think we have any 62 or 63 left. I could be wrong.
Well, if you do, please share. Okay. Can you guys, we've talked a lot about Paul Draper. I'll share a quick story. I shared this with you earlier, Michael, but, Ridge was part of the 1976 Tasting of Paris, what put California wines on the map. And I was lucky enough when I was a sommelier in New York, Ridge and Paul, and like you said, Michael, we had a great relationship. Paul did a great dinner at Oriole in New York. And I think because we knew each other, Michael, you said, why don't you go sit next to Paul? And we had this, he was giving a presentation and kind of holding court like he would. And at some point I was talking to him about the 76 of Tasting of Paris. And he goes to me, he's like, oh, do you think they want to hear about that? And I said, yes. He was so humble. And even though he was holding court and could talk about so many different things, that was I had to put that in his ear that yes, people want to hear about that. So I just think that's so cool, but he has so many great stories. Michael, can you share a Paul story, a memorable moment that you've had with him?
Oh my goodness. I've had so many with him over the years. He really just, he's kind of one of the most welcoming, kind of fun and humble people you'll ever be. And just always happy to talk wine, talk life, talk food, travel, all of it. There's kind of countless just great stories with him. And I remember that Oriole, and yeah, that's exactly why I put you next to him, because I knew he's going to like you. You're going to like him. This is going to look good for me.
Thank you, Michael. John, how about you? Being the predecessor of Paul, you must have some unbelievable stories.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, I certainly, a lot of the our assemblage tastings for Montebello come to mind where, I can remember some of the first years when I was around the table with Paul, and one of the first things I noticed is Paul always has a little bit of olive oil, but he doesn't have a spitting cup. And I mean, he's such a tireless taster. I mean, we would sit down at 8:30 and then break for 15 minutes for lunch. And I'm thinking we're over with. And then Paul comes back. He says, he wants to retaste this. Next thing, it's 3:00. And I mean, I don't know, we're tasting young Montebello too. Just his ability to stay focused and taste so many wines. I mean, I think it says a lot about his passion for wine, but for Montebello.
Indefatigable. Gentlemen, I appreciate your time and spending this time with me talking about Ridge and sharing your insights so much. I will tell all of you out there, make sure you get yourself some Ridge wines and you will drink deliciously. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Matt.